Professor Peter Flint is Professor of Religious Studies and co-director of the Dead Sea Scrolls Institute at Trinity Western University in British Columbia. He also holds the Canada Research Chair in Dead Sea Scrolls Studies, which is funded in large part by the Canadian government. He has written several books, some of them bestsellers. He is a force and one of the influencers of this terrific thing that's happening at the Royal Ontario Museum right now, an exhibition of the Dead Sea Scrolls called Words That Changed the World. We've had him a couple times in the past, and each time saying, man, we got to have you back, because this is absolutely fascinating stuff. So welcome back, Dr. Peter Flint.
Thank you, Jim.
You're almost becoming a regular. I have to put you on salary here. Just for the sake of viewers who have not met you before and haven't been down to the ROM yet, tell us a little bit about the Dead Sea Scrolls, how they were discovered and why they're important.
Jim, over 60 years ago, a shepherd boy threw a stone into a cave and he heard the sound of breaking pottery. That was the stone that changed the world, because in those pots were found the scrolls. In fact, we have a model here today.
Yeah, and this was Qumran, right? Just south of Jerusalem?
The place of Qumran, about 15 miles from Jerusalem, near the shore of the Dead Sea.
Yeah, and this is a kind of a replica. It's sort of just a facsimile of one of the jars, pottery jars that was discovered there.
And of course, it was what was in the jars that matters.
He reached in, and here's a scroll that comes out. Now, this is, again, just a little replica, but this is how writing was done in those days. It was just spread out on sheepskin, basically?
Right, sheepskin, and recent DNA tests have showed ibex.
Oh, really?
Some of them are on paper, and even ones on copper, of course.
Oh, really? Ibex. I didn't know that. So they discover these scrolls. They take them to an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem. He buys them. This guy realizes their significance, takes it to his chief priest with the Syrian Orthodox Church, and then suddenly the world of archaeology and biblical study has changed forever. Right,
changed forever. Because you see, Jews, Christian scholars have realized we now have documents for the first time that were written from before the time of Jesus Christ. Let me say Jim, that the scrolls are so important, and today we're going to focus on the non-biblical scrolls. You see, they throw important light onto Judaism. You see, we didn't have Jewish documents from that time. We only had later documents. And now what the scrolls do is they uncover for us the varied world of Judaism in the days of Jesus. We now know much more about the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and this fascinating group living out in the desert called the Essenes, who hid the Dead Sea Scrolls. So Jews are vitally interested in the scrolls because it's a lost chapter in the history of Judaism.
There's theories as to why they hid them. Were they fearing the encroaching Romans, or why do you suppose they hid them?
Yes, two reasons. Some scrolls may have been put in the caves as resting places or burial places. You see, in Judaism today even, you don't burn a Torah scroll. Right. They are either buried or they're put into a geniza, a special room, but you don't destroy a copy of the Bible. So some may have been put there for resting, but the main reason we think is as the Romans were sweeping down Palestine on their way to Jerusalem in 68 AD, they came to Qumran, and there was a battle there. We know there was because of arrowheads, and they had a fortress, and we think they hid most of the scrolls in the caves to keep them safe from the Romans.
And these caves are not easy to access. I mean, I've been there several times because I used to live in Israel, but some of them are a huge climb.
Yes.
Some of them are very well camouflaged just by the topography around them.
Right.
I mean, and those who actually got into them eventually,
yes,
archaeologists and so on, really had to pay the price in terms of heat and dust and,
yes,
and effort, right?
And that's wonderful, because if the scrolls had been discovered 500 years ago, we'd have nothing left.
No, right.
It's only in our age with modern scientific techniques of preservation that we can even read and have the scrolls.
And the fact is that you can now accurately say that these things date probably to the 3rd century before Christ. Some of them may be a century beyond Christ, right? So there's a 300 to 500 year.
Well, 250 BC to 68 AD. Now, Jim, I said one of the reasons is they're so important for Judaism. But the other reason why the non-biblical scrolls are so important is for Christians.
Okay, now let's talk about the non-biblical scrolls. In the past, we've talked about Psalm 145, we've talked about Isaiah 53, and friends, if you missed those interviews, you can log on to our website and find those interviews with Dr. Flint. You really should. This actually should be made into a kind of a DVD presentation. I mean, this is terrific stuff. But the non-biblical scrolls really are fascinating, and they have terrific impact, especially not just on understanding the time in which Jesus lived, but also in terms of understanding the New Testament.
Exactly. And I'd like to focus on 2 or 3 of those today, if we could.
Sure, sure.
What we're going to look at first is the Messianic apocalypse. Perhaps it could come on the screen.
Yeah, we'll put that on the screen as you talk about it.
With respect to Jesus, I think there's been a lot of bad press about Jesus and what he did and what he didn't do. Dan Brown, for instance, in the Da Vinci Code, has all these theories. And he keeps on speaking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. He says it's in the scrolls that Jesus had a lover called Mary Magdalene. It's in the scrolls that they had children. And he uses the scrolls falsely. The glory of the Dead Sea Scrolls is most of them are before Jesus Christ. They are too early for the church to have messed with them.
Right.
And that's actually the strength of them. I'd like to illustrate to you now one example of how this is done. I'm going to take us to Luke chapter 4.
Right.
Okay, so this is a very famous passage, Luke chapter 4, when Jesus comes to Nazareth in Luke 4, verse 16.
Right.
It says, when he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it is written. So nice you having that jar to illustrate exactly what Jesus was doing. And he reads this, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free. And we see in Luke 4 that everybody was amazed. He doesn't say, I'm the Messiah, but if you were to ask most Christians, Jesus is claiming to be Messiah, because he goes on to say, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. But it's elusive. Jesus seems to be claiming to be Messiah, but it's elusive. It's not explicit.
Right.
Now we have a scroll that is coming to Toronto, to the museum. It is called the Messianic Apocalypse. And this is an amazing scroll. It is 1st century BC. It's not a Christian scroll. And it basically tells us what's going to happen when the Messiah comes. And it gives us a recipe of what will happen. Let me just read for you a few lines. Yeah. The Messianic Apocalypse. It says in line 1, the heavens and the earth shall listen to his Messiah. So the word Mashiach is there. It's about the Messiah. And then it goes on to say, later on, what will happen, he will honor the pious, release the captives, open the eyes of the blind, lift up the oppressed. He will heal the wounded, raise the dead, bring good news to the poor. Now, Jim, I'm simplifying it, but the way I like to put it is this. If we take Google, and you were to take Luke 4 that I read to you earlier, when Jesus says, good news to the poor, release to the captives, sight to the blind, let the oppressed go free. Now, if you were just to get one hit on Google, it could be random, but if you were to take that unique combination, those 4 things, good news to the poor, release to the captives, sight to the blind, let the oppressed go free, all of those, we get a hit in our manuscripts. In other words, this Jewish scroll of the 1st century BC is saying that when the Messiah comes, this is what you expect. The very recipe that Jesus reads in Luke 4. And then when Jesus says, today the scripture's been fulfilled in your hearing, it means everybody knew he's claiming to be Messiah, because we have a Jewish text which says that's what the Messiah would claim.
And when John the Baptist was feeling insecure about Jesus and sent his followers to ask Jesus if he was the Messiah, doesn't he basically quote the same stuff?
It even gets better. It even gets better. I'm lingering on this because this is the most important scroll with respect to Christian origins. John the Baptist is in real trouble. He's about to die.
Right.
As you know, he's disillusioned.
Yeah.
So he sends his disciples and says to Jesus, Are you really the one who is to come, or should we wait for another? And it says here in Luke chapter 7, Jesus had just been curing many people and given sight to the blind. Jesus answered John the Baptist, you go and tell John what you've seen and heard. Again, he doesn't say I'm the Messiah. He says, go and tell him what you've seen. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. Now, Jim, this is a very serious verse, because many liberal scholars have said, well, please, maybe he'd claim the stuff from Isaiah, the good news to the poor, but it says Jesus is saying the dead are raised. And many a scholar said, well, that's obviously not from Jesus.